There are many people who are attacking Nick Fuentes right now over things he said that are objectively true, like his critique of Israel or calling J.D. Vance fat and brown. But one thing I'll say about Nick Fuentes is he is dead wrong when it comes to his support for a war on Venezuela. This is not America first. This is a terrible idea. And I'm sure if and when the war happens, things start to go south, Nick will come out and say, that he never supported this. But we have the video proof that he did support it. Apparently, he'd rather have Maria Corina Machado leading Venezuela, a staunch Zionist who called on Netanyahu and Israel to invade and liberate Venezuela from President Maduro. Couldn't tell you why, it's beyond me, but take a listen to what he has to say here in these clips, and then we will break it down.
A war that would be good for us is a war where we actually get stuff and would make us rich. Like a war that would make us rich is to go to war in Venezuela. And a lot of people are criticizing me. They're like, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. They have a lot of oil. We should fucking take it. We're the biggest country ever. We're the biggest and best country ever. They have all this oil and we're playing games. We're going to let this guy say, oh, you don't get our oil. Says fucking who? We will come in and we will kill all of you. Our military will come in and wipe out your regime and we will take your oil and enrich our country. If you went to war in Venezuela, we get all the oil and all the gas and it makes us rich. And we could honestly just steal it. We are in a great power competition with China and Russia for the alignment of middle powers, for the alignment of resource-rich countries. And we're in a battle with Russia and China over supply chains and the resources that fuel the supply chains. Specifically things like energy, rare earths, minerals, and then the shipping routes that transit those raw materials. Who cares if Venezuela is run by some corrupt, petty tyrant? Just take their shit. Get as many countries on our side of the ledger so that we can take their shit. I actually probably favor regime change in Venezuela. I actually think it would be beneficial if we had a pro-American regime in Venezuela. Probably would be good for us because of the resources they have. And we also want to keep, in my opinion, South America on our side of the ledger. I think that it would be a good thing if America could take all their oil and natural gas. We need the energy. We want the energy. We're coming up on the end of the fracking boom. We want their oil and natural gas. They're not making enough of it because of the pressure on them. Strictly speaking, it would be better if there was an American-aligned government there that could optimally and efficiently extract those resources and send them to the United States. It'd be better for our economy. It'd be better for our technology industry in the era where electricity and energy is a very important commodity for intelligence and for defense. That's a good thing, actually. I don't like these small-minded arguments where people say, anytime America uses its wealth and power, that's not America first. Well, what exactly is America first? Is the only thing that the military can do to patrol the border? And some people might say yes, but I would say no, we want to control our periphery. We want to control a sphere of influence. Is that not what every other country is doing? What is Russia doing? What is China doing?
So we're all on the same page here. For some odd, suspicious reason, the America First guy supports another regime change war in Latin America because those have all gone so well for us in the past. Now, Venezuela, in actuality, is going to make Vietnam look like a cakewalk. Venezuela is going to be Vietnam on steroids. There's many reasons for that. For starters, 80% of the terrain in Venezuela are mountains. This is a hellhole for anyone, any military who wants to try and invade this country, let alone the U.S. military, who we'll say has limited combat experience in recent modern history. Not to mention, Venezuela shares a massive border with Colombia, whose government is sympathetic to Venezuela. Their military is sympathetic to Venezuela. They're obviously fearful of a U.S. invasion in Colombia themselves. Their president was just sanctioned by the United States because he happened to critique Israel while he was at the United Nations speaking before the General Assembly a few weeks ago. Not to mention, Colombia has a bunch of paramilitary groups that would love to have the opportunity, I believe, to fight against U.S. military personnel on their own terrain. So there's that. There's also the urban dilemma. When you look at the population of Saigon during the Vietnam War, you had about 3 million people living there. Well, Venezuela has Caracas with 5 million people, dense urban area, not to mention the nearby surrounding barrios, which have millions of people living there. I can't imagine trying to go on foot or armored personnel carrier through those barrios, invading it with U.S. military personnel. That would be, again, making Vietnam look like a cakewalk. You have Valencia, which has about 2 million people in Venezuela, another dense urban area. You have Maracaibo, also 2 million people. I mean, the idea that this is going to be easy, you're just going to go in and kill them all, is ridiculous and absurd on its face. Now, some people might say, Jackson, not everyone in Venezuela supports Maduro. Maybe they'll be happy about this U.S. intervention. The truth is, the same thing that happened in Iran during the 12-day war is going to happen in Venezuela. In Iran, not everyone supports the Islamic Republic government. Not everyone supports the IRGC. But when Israel and the United States began launching airstrikes upon their civilians and their government officials, the overwhelming majority of the public united behind the cause of Iranian sovereignty and Iranian self-defense, and it actually united the government position and strengthened it. In Venezuela, while there is a minority of people that oppose Maduro, and it's not marginal. I mean, there's a good number of people that oppose Maduro, I'm sure, all across the country. The people don't support U.S. military intervention. According to recent U.S. and British polls, 80 to 90% of the Venezuelan public are united behind the idea that they oppose U.S. military intervention, meaning that if the U.S. begins these airstrikes, they are going to unite behind and strengthen the position of the Maduro government or whatever subsequent government comes after these possible decapitation strikes. The Venezuelan military also outpaces the scope and size of the military of the North Vietnamese army and the Viet Cong during the U.S. war on Vietnam. The Viet Cong had no real heavy armaments. The Venezuelans obviously do. The North Vietnamese army had about 500,000 people active duty, if I'm not mistaken, when the war began. Venezuela's national military, their regular army, has 350,000 active duty personnel, 1.2 million reservists, and they have a people's militia that outnumbers the Viet Cong by a factor of 10. They have about 2 to 3 million people who are all armed to the teeth in their people's militia. Now, one would ask the question if, what Lindsey Graham and Marco Rubio said is true, that everyone in Venezuela hates Maduro. Why is Maduro handing out guns left and right to the average citizens in his country? The truth is, Rubio, Graham, they're all lying. The people want to defend their country. And if and when a U.S. invasion happens, chaos and hell are going to break out there like you could never imagine. I'll also add that there are 2 million Arabs that are living inside of Venezuela, Lebanese, Syrians, Palestinians. And if you honestly believe that those 2 million Arabs are all there on vacations, or they're just working in an office all day and not there for some security reasons, some defense reasons, I've got a bridge to sell you. Okay. Not to mention Venezuela has support from Iran, from China, from Russia. There are Russian military personnel on active duty inside of Venezuela. Russia just landed some big military cargo jets there, but this is nothing new. The Russians have had an active presence there since 2019, the last regime change and war threats that were thrust upon the Venezuelan people by the United States government. A war on Venezuela is going to go horribly wrong. Probably going to cost trillions of dollars. The U.S. is going to get absolutely cooked. Maduro has over five successors in line, but I don't even think that matters. Hypothetically, if the U.S. were to airstrike all of those successors, the military will establish some sort of a government. It's going to be far more anti-U.S. than the Maduro government. The military government will begin to imprison, at the least, any of these opposition leaders, U.S.-backed opposition and CIA, State Department-backed movements. They will imprison them. They will squash all dissent, and they will make sure that stability comes back to the country. Martial law will ensue until that point. And honestly, I don't know how long it would take. The Chavistas have very strong influence in 90+% of the cities all across the country. I mean, they have like deeper influence than Ba'athist Iraq. So the idea that just decapitation strikes alone are going to get the job done is, again, ludicrous. The U.S. will have to invade if they want regime change in Venezuela. And I don't think this is something that we as American patriots should support.
They have a lot of oil. We should fucking take it. We're going to let this guy say, oh, you don't get our oil. Says fucking who? We get all the oil and all the gas, and we could honestly just steal it. Just take their shit. We want their oil and natural gas.
Now, as for Nick's claims that we'll just go in and steal their oil, I think he just doesn't understand what the U.S. relationship with the Venezuelan government currently is, because Chevron, a U.S. company, currently accounts for 25% of Venezuela's oil production. That's no small number. In fact, the Venezuelan government has no problem whatsoever with the U.S. corporations doing fair and open business in Venezuela. When Chevron's oil permits were reinstated in Venezuela after the U.S. decided to allow for them to do that, President Maduro said, look, Chevron, you can have permits here for the next 100 years. We would celebrate it. He actually said that. That's a direct quote. The problem with U.S. companies doing business in Venezuela is not the Venezuelan government. It's the U.S. government. From February of 2025 to July of 2025, the Trump administration blocked Chevron, the only company who was doing any business in Venezuela, from operating there. This is despite the fact that Chevron wants to do business there. They lobbied the Trump administration very hard to do business there. They spent an exorbitant amount of money on the Trump administration, their campaign, the inaugural event, to try and soften the idea of allowing them to do business in Venezuela. It makes a lot of money. For the same price that you could get 1 barrel of oil in the United States, if you're Chevron, you can probably get about 2 barrels of oil out of Venezuela, despite the fact that it is a lower quality crude oil. Now, in that period of time, those months, February to July of 2025, that the Trump administration blocked Chevron from doing any business in Venezuela, guess what happened? Venezuela said, okay, we will replace Chevron with foreign partners. So they went and signed 9 deals with foreign partners to do exactly what Chevron is doing. Shocker. China was one of the main countries that filled the void of Chevron, and they were the ones that got to benefit from Venezuela's massive oil reserves, the largest oil reserves in the world, not the United States. Now, in July of 2025, the Trump administration opened up the possibility for Chevron to operate in Venezuela once more. And Chevron is operating there till this day, despite the fact that there are strikes going on right off the coast and a planned invasion of Venezuela coming very soon. As Chevron was given this exemption to U.S. sanctions by the good graces of Donald Trump, and as I said a few moments ago, 25% of Venezuela's national oil output is taking place thanks to Chevron. Chevron is helping Venezuela achieve 1 million barrels of oil produced each and every day. They're behind 80% of Venezuela's recent increase in oil output, and they're helping Venezuela lead the way into a 2 to 3% GDP growth over the next year. So the idea that the U.S. operating in Venezuela is inherently detrimental to Venezuela is a lie. I mean, if the U.S. is doing fair business with the Venezuelan government, that's okay. That's acceptable to everyone, and it is mutually beneficial. The idea that the U.S. is going to come in and rape and pillage Venezuela, privatize all of their assets and sell it for pennies on the dollar to the United States and these giant oil corporations, mineral corporations, BlackRock, so on and so forth, that is unacceptable. It needs to be fair trade, fair business, and that's what the U.S. seemingly can't accept here, and is why they want to send your sons and daughters to go die in Venezuela in this new regime change war, because fair business isn't good enough. They're far too greedy for that. and they want all the oil, all the minerals, all the gold for practically free.
Like a war that would make us rich is to go to war in Venezuela. And it makes us rich. And we could honestly just steal it. Our military will come in and wipe out your regime, and we'll take your oil and enrich our country.
Now, one of the other major high IQ arguments that Nick put forward was that, well, if we do this war, we'll get so rich. Now, let's just forget the fact that a war on Venezuela would be extremely costly, probably trillions of dollars, $2-3 trillion, I would imagine. The idea that the U.S. public is going to get rich off of a war in Venezuela is just as absurd as stating that the U.S. public was going to get rich off of a war in Iraq or Afghanistan or Syria or Russia. It's just not going to happen. How do we know that that is the case? Well, we can look to somewhat recent history. From the 1910s to 1976, British-controlled Shell owned most of Venezuela's oil output. They controlled about 30%. The other 70% was controlled by a minority of smaller partners. And in that time, Shell made a lot of money. In fact, during World War II, Venezuela supplied the UK with 40% of their total oil consumption throughout the entirety of the war. Now, if Nick's arguments are accurate here, we would imagine that the UK also had a sizable increase in wealth at the point in time when Shell controlled about 1/3 of Venezuela's annual oil output. But of course, the truth is much different than that. Shell, of course, had massive profits from their control of Venezuelan oil. In fact, by 1967, Shell had, I believe, about 300 million euros in fixed assets thanks to their business in Venezuela. But it just so happens that the profits that were earned as a result of this Venezuelan oil went to the shareholders of Shell. It went to the Bank of England. It went to British aristocracy. Didn't go to the average people of the UK. But did the UK have a lot of jobs that were generated as a result of the business in Venezuela? The answer to that question is no. Shell relied on foreign and cheap labor, mostly workers from the Caribbean, mostly actually Venezuelan workers, to do the job that was needed to be done to extract this oil in Venezuela and send it over to the UK. So no, there were not a lot of jobs generated from this. The wealth was obviously mismanaged. I guess not mismanaged in the eyes of Shell. It went to their shareholders and it went to the wealthy elite in the UK. But no, we are not going to make sizable amounts of money off of a war in Venezuela. This is going to be extremely costly. And of course, all the money from the minerals. Venezuela has the most minerals on the entire continent, the most gold on the entire continent. And as I mentioned, the most proven oil reserves in the entire world. All of the profits generated from this are going to go to BlackRock. They're going to go to the oil and gas companies, the mineral companies. And guess who stands to benefit the most from this? Just so happens that Eric Prince has the great idea of sending in paramilitary groups to Venezuela to take over the country. So he'll probably receive a lot of money from the U.S. taxpayer. And Marco Rubio and Lindsey Graham have big oil deals that will make them a lot of money if, in fact, regime change takes place and Maria Corina Machado takes power, or any U.S.-backed opposition leader takes power. So, no, we will not get rich. These same old figures will get rich, and it will just empower them further. Now, I know Nick opposes mass migration into the United States, as do I. I think we need mass deportation of a lot of these people from the United States, millions of people from the United States. But the question of a war on Venezuela, I mean, what do we think is going to happen here? What are we doing? This is 2025, and we're arguing in one sentence that we need to curb mass migration, and the next sentence we're saying that we need a war on Venezuela. What do we really think is going to happen here, okay? Since 2015, when the U.S. began these extremely harsh sanctions on Venezuela, there have been 7.9 million people displaced. In 2024, Venezuelans were the second largest group by nationality that Border Patrol had contact with at the southern border, about 225,000 people, if I'm not mistaken. Most international organizations, these humanitarian organizations, they estimate that If, in fact, the U.S. decides to place these crippling sanctions back on Venezuela in the same way that they once were, over the next 5 years, there's going to be over 1 million, between 1 to 2 million Venezuelans that, again, leave the country and will eventually seek refuge in the United States. Now imagine what would take place if we had a war on Venezuela. Venezuela has 30 million people. Millions and millions and millions of those people will leave the country and eventually find their way to the southern border of the United States. Why on earth would anyone support this when we can just do fair and open business with Venezuela? Venezuela wants fair and open business with the United States. It's the U.S. that's blocking this. A war on Venezuela? What are we going to do? We already control 25% of their national oil output. We want the 75% that we don't have control over. Okay, make new deals. Make deals that cannot be refused by the Venezuelan government. Make deals that Russia and China cannot compete with. I mean, it's as simple as that. But instead, again, you have these high IQ arguments coming that we need to have another mass migration crisis from Venezuela by starting a war on their country.
We are in a great power competition with China and Russia for the alignment of middle powers, for the alignment of resource-rich countries, and we're in a battle with Russia and China over supply chains and the resources that fuel the supply chains. And we also want to keep, in my opinion, South America on our side of the ledger. I think that it would be a good thing if America could take all their oil and natural gas. We need the energy. I don't like these small-minded arguments where people say, anytime America uses its wealth and power, that's not America first. Well, what exactly is America first? Is the only thing that the military can do to patrol the border? And some people might say yes, but I would say no, we want to control our periphery. We want to control a sphere of influence. Is that not what every other country is doing? What is Russia doing? What is China doing?
As a final point, and this is kind of hitting the whole thing home, Nick argues that the U.S. needs to control our sphere of influence. Hence, we should support this war on Venezuela. He says, well, Russia and China do this, so why shouldn't we do this? What is the point of the U.S. military? Just to defend our borders? Well, I happen to be of the belief that, yes, it is not really a good position for the U.S. to have 800 military bases across the world, a $1 trillion military budget, most of which is being siphoned off by the executives and shareholders of defense corporations, while actually contributing nothing to the defense of our country, the security of our country. But let's just take this argument. Well, Russia and China do it. Russia said that they don't want long-range missiles or nukes on their border in Ukraine. That's a little bit different than saying, there's economic influence in Latin America because China and Russia are giving better deals to the governments there than the U.S. has to offer. That's a little bit different. It's not like Russia and China are placing nukes in Mexico. That would be the equivalent we're talking about here. So Nick wants to bring up Ukraine. Well, the Russians didn't have a problem with Ukraine choosing to do business with the EU. They were fine with that for many years. The problem was when Kamala Harris said that we need to place nukes in Ukraine to threaten Russia. That's a problem, objectively. China doesn't have a problem with Taiwan doing business with the United States or the EU or anyone else. The problem is when you have U.S. military personnel going to Taiwan and training their separatists and putting a bunch of Tomahawk missiles in their country and arming it to the teeth for an eventual provocative war against the Chinese. That's the difference here. As for the spheres of influence of China and Russia, they don't achieve these spheres, these economic spheres of influence by force. In fact, I think they're actually quite incapable of doing this by force. If you look at some of the recent U.S. regime change efforts that have taken place in Central Asia, in Western Asia, in Southeast Asia, I mean, these have all taken place at the hands of the National Endowment for Democracy, USAID-funded organizations, and China has actually lost a few governments here. The only way that China and Russia are able to maintain the economic spheres of influence that they have are through programs like the Belt and Road Initiative, lucrative industrial or manufacturing or infrastructure deals that they offer to these countries. That is the path to success. Win-win cooperation. China is winning the world, including Latin America, by saying we are going to give you deals that you cannot refuse. We are going to beat whatever the U.S. is throwing at you insofar as major oil deals, energy deals, tech deals, industrial deals, manufacturing deals, whatever it may be. That is how they are winning. China is not winning by launching airstrikes on countries. In fact, when is the last time that China has invaded a country? Can anyone answer that question? When is the last time that Russia has invaded a country that wasn't seeking NATO membership so they could place long-range missiles, nukes, and U.S. military personnel in their country right on the Russian border? The answer is you can't name any examples because Russia and China are not doing what Donald Trump is threatening in Venezuela. What Donald Trump is trying to do in Venezuela is not going to work. It's going to turn more people all across, Central and Southern America against the United States. And how do we know that? Because there is a long history of the United States conducting regime change operations, wars, and interventions all across Southern and Central America, and it hasn't worked out so well. Let's run through the list. 1976 in Argentina, there was a U.S. intervention. Now we have economic crisis in Argentina. We just bailed out their government to the tune of $40 billion. They have mass inflation, mass unemployment. Their peso is extremely devalued. They've just indebted themselves another $34 billion to the IMF. They sent their gold off to British banksters on British Airways jets. They have sweeping electricity and energy blackouts all across their major cities. Not the stunning example of economic success and prosperity that the U.S. would have hoped for by gaining a U.S.-controlled government in Argentina, but that is what Argentina looks like right now. Bolivia had U.S. interventions in 1971 and 2019, and they've had an anti-U.S. government, pro-Russian, pro-Chinese government for the last 20 years. Brazil had U.S. intervention in 1964. Today, the Brazilian government, while, not perfect, their number one trading partner is China. How did that work out for the United States? They are very supportive of China in the diplomatic stage as well as Russia. Chile had U.S. intervention in 1964 and 1973. Their number one trading partner today is China by leaps and bounds. U.S. intervention took place in Costa Rica in 1948, and although there's obviously a lot of U.S. tourism, U.S. business in Costa Rica today, it's probably like one of the most pro-U.S. governments in all of Latin America. They still do a hefty amount of trade with China. Their number two trading partner is China. China conducts import-export trade that accounts for about 20% of their annual imports and exports in Costa Rica. I don't even need to get into all of the U.S. interventions in Cuba, assassination attempts, regime change attempts that are still ongoing. Obviously, Cuba is in the midst of immense economic hardship right now. But regardless of whatever the U.S. has done with these crippling sanctions, the economic blockade on the country, the people are still very opposed to the U.S. So much so that apparently the U.S. would rather try to start a war on Venezuela than Cuba because they think it's going to be easier to do it in Venezuela than in Cuba, where the Cuban people stand firmly with the government there, despite all of the hardship. El Salvador had a U.S. intervention in 1979. They still have very, very close relations with China and the United States, but one of their strongest trading partners today, still China. U.S. intervention took place in Guatemala in 1954, so the U.S. can say that they have victory in Guatemala. Guatemala is ardently pro-U.S., and they do a significant amount of business with the U.S. It's their number one trade partner, as well as in Grenada, which had U.S. intervention in 1983. So extremely victorious campaigns for the biggest military, the baddest military in Guatemala and Grenada. Congratulations. Honduras had U.S. intervention in 1988 and 2009. Their number one trading partner does happen to be the United States, but not too far behind is China at number two. And diplomatically on the international stage, Honduras stands with Venezuela, Nicaragua, Cuba, Russia, China, so on and so forth. So didn't work out too well there. Nicaragua saw U.S. intervention in 1979 and 1981, and they are fervently anti-U.S. It didn't work to convince the people in Nicaragua that they should support Reagan or the United States government. The people there stand with Russia, China, Venezuela, Cuba. You get the idea. They are strong anti-imperialists and socialists. Panama saw a major U.S. intervention in 1989, and while 17% of their import-export trade goes to the United States, we get really cool stuff from Panama, like we get their waste and their scrap, extremely important, imports from Panama. As for China, they do 15%, almost the same amount of import-export trade with Panama, but China gets important materials like copper ore and agricultural goods. Paraguay had U.S. intervention in 1954 and 1989. Their number one trade partner is Brazil. Number two trade partner, also China. Didn't work out in Paraguay either. Peru saw U.S. intervention in 1963, 1990, and they've had many U.S. coup attempts in recent years, but still 30% of their annual import-export trade is with China, their number one trading partner. Uruguay had a U.S. intervention in 1973. Their number one trading partner is also China. Number two is Brazil. And let's finish off here with Venezuela, who had U.S. interventions in 2002, 2019, and now looks like is about to have the biggest one of all. Now, it may surprise you to learn that Venezuela's number one trading partner is the United States, with 35% of their annual import-export business being with the United States. China falls in at second place with 20% of import-export trade for Venezuela being conducted with them. Now, I would one more time posit the question to anyone who supports the idea that we need a war on Venezuela. What is wrong with the current relationship with Venezuela? On the Venezuelan side, because it's clear that they have no problem with U.S. being their number one trading partner. It's clear that they have no problem with giving century-long oil deals, oil permits, gas permits, mineral permits to U.S. corporations. They just want fair business to be conducted. They don't want their country to be raped and pillaged by the United States, and they don't want their civilians to be killed in airstrikes by the United States. The United States is the problem with Venezuela. The United States wants to do all of this. They want to install Maria Corina Machado, who has planned to promise to make Venezuela a country that embodies gay marriage. They're going to promote gay marriage, legalize gay marriage. They're going to promote the LGBT agenda. They're going to be staunchly Zionist, staunchly pro-Israel. Again, they have Maria Corina Machado asked Netanyahu in a letter to invade and liberate Venezuela from President Maduro. Maria Corina Machado has promised to privatize all of Venezuela's oil resources and mineral assets, so they will essentially be stolen by all these Western corporations, and you'll have Lindsey Graham, Marco Rubio making billions and billions of dollars. I mean, how is this America first? How is this helping the average American worker? How is this benefiting our country in any way, shape, or form? The way I see it, we start a war in Venezuela. It's going to go poorly. Lots of people are going to die. It's going to be very expensive. Mass migration is going to increase. American workers aren't going to benefit because all the jobs generated are going to be cheap labor jobs, foreign jobs, mostly Venezuelan and Caribbean workers. We've seen the proof. It's going to unite people in Venezuela against the U.S. even further, and it's going to unite people all across Latin America to form closer relationships with countries that can be trusted, like China or Russia, for example, or really anyone that isn't threatening to airstrike their country and overthrow their government. Obviously, what is taking place is not about narco trafficking. Fentanyl is not produced in Venezuela. Even Rand Paul admitted that last week on Piers Morgan. And Nick understands that. So I question Nick at this point, this stage in the video. Do you still support U.S. war on Venezuela? I can't imagine anyone who would at this point, but maybe you do. It's very clear that you did in the past. We'll see if you change your position and explain why you changed your position or why you had your previous position. I don't think it aligns with anything that you claim to uphold. If you're America first, this is like the exact opposite of what you should want. What you should want is the U.S. to do more business in Venezuela and embody what China's been able to achieve with all their trading partners in their sphere of influence. Win-win cooperation makes a lot of sense. It's a lot cheaper. It's going to make us a lot more money. And it's a lot less violent and bloody, and it's actually going to win the hearts and minds of people all across the world to show that America can be a trustworthy partner and, as you put it, a trustworthy empire.